Hi guys, it's Ivo from mytestedasp.net, and in this video we're going to continue developing our Catstagram server. Before we begin with our user profile, the editing of our user profile, I would like to mention that if you're new around here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn the bell notifications on because I'm uploading advanced C# lessons every week. Now let's begin. Before I write down the edit of the user profile, let's see how we implement the cat updating. We essentially had a cat service which did the job for us, and that service returns false if there's some sort of a problem or error or something like that. The client decided and wanted to make the update ID part of the ID not to be part of the request model, but to be in the URL. So I'm going to update that. I'm going to say that the ID comes from the route itself. And I need to specify the route of the update like this. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to have the same functionality for the profiles. We want to be able to edit a profile. So let's write HTTP put authorize public async task action result, and we're just going to return bad request with a message or return OK when the profile is actually updated. So we're going to receive. We won't need an ID because the profile doesn't need to have an ID because we have the ID in the token. So what we need is to create the same way we have update cat request model. Here we're going to create update profile request model. To update the request, we just need to have all the data which is available for each profile. Opening the profile, everything is editable here, and using static validation dot user. What we also can edit on Instagram is the email address and the username. So let's add that too. Update profile request model, and here essentially we need the same functionality like in the cat. But instead of the cats, we are going to use profiles, and we just need to create the method providing all the necessary data from the update profile request model. So what we're going to do here is we're going to provide everything. So first we need to provide user ID, then model dot email, model dot username, model dot name, main photo, URL, website. Like that. We may create a class for this one. I don't like to pass the request model to the service layer because this request model is essentially for the web framework. If we have AutoMapper installed, which we currently don't have, we may create a service model for this update. We're going to refactor the code in the future, but for now let's leave it like this. It's a little bit too much parameters, but we are going to update that in a future video. For now, let's leave it like that. Okay, let's create the task with bool. Let's change the names of the parameters. And let's implement that. I'm going to show you something clever here. It will be a little bit different than the standard, than the other cat service model, because for the cat service model we essentially don't have any custom logic when we edit it. But for example, with the profiles we have custom logic. By custom logic I mean that we cannot update the email if that email already exists. We cannot update the username to something that already exists. The username basically I believe that's the two custom logics we need to add. So that's important, and we need to provide a way to return a message here. So what we need to do is we need to return some sort of an error, and this error should be a string. But what happens if we don't have an error? We may return no, but that's not it may lead to a no reference exception. So I'm going to show you a result object which is a little bit cooler to use in such situations. Okay, so in the profile service what we need to do is essentially almost the same like here. So I'm going to reuse that logic from the cat service, but first we need to mark the method as async. Then we need to validate whether we're allowed to edit this user. So we need to find a user with this ID. So I'm saying this data.users find async by the user ID. If the user is no, return false. Then we need to validate some of the data here. For example, if the email or the username are different. First, we need to provide whether the email is not null or white space. If it's null or white space, we won't edit it. But if it's not, we need to change it and we need to validate it. So existing email, we need to say this data users. Is there an username with that email provided which has a different ID from our ID, which is provided from the logged user. So essentially we're searching for another user with that email we're trying to use. If that is a problem, so if there is if the email exists, we're going to return false. Of course, if we want to be completely correct, we need to return an error message here, but that in a minute. If the email exists, return false. Otherwise, we are going to say that the user now has a new email. We need to validate the same thing for the username. If the username is changed and it's not null or empty, we need to say username exists. We need to find another user with the username we're trying to update the profile. So if the username exists, again, we no longer can update it. And for everything else, I believe we just, the name doesn't need to be unique. The URL, the website, the biography, these are kind of okay the way they are currently. So user.name, user.profile name equals the name. User.profile, just going to say it like that. For now, this should be more than enough, but if the client requires some changes in the logic, we are going to refactor our code. But for now, it should be fine. So, okay, everything should be working, but what happens when we have an error? For example, if we are not allowed to edit the email because the email already exists for another user. Because we need to have unique emails. Also, we can do and because we don't want to ask the database if the user doesn't change the email. So what we can do is if the user email is different from the provided email. So search only if the user is is if the currently saved email is different. We don't need to search for there is no or white space in that situation. So this check should be more than enough. The whole optimization I'm doing here is that I don't want to make an extra call to the database if the current user doesn't update his email. But if he updates the email, when that will be uh, important. But if he tries to, if he doesn't send the email, let's add that. So the check is if the user doesn't change the email, or if the email is not null or white space, so it's an valid email and the user email is different, then we need to call the database. Otherwise, we don't need to do it. We just need to update these properties. This is a good enough optimization to skip a database call if the user doesn't update his data and updates only some of these other properties. Okay, but let me check something. In the register request model, we didn't provide that we want this to be an email address, so I'm going to add it now. I'm going to add it here too, that this needs to be an email address if it's provided. It's not required because the user may not want to update the email. This is why we're checking the logic. So our logic is if it's a valid email address and it's not null or white space because we don't want to have empty emails saved in our database, and if it doesn't exist, then add it. I believe our identity registration is the same. If it's not the same, it returns an error. For example, the user already exists or the email already exists. Good, okay. So this should be more than enough. For our update method, we are going to replace that when we add automapper. The problem for now is that we are not returning the error messages. We are just returning bad requests, and the client will not know what's the problem exactly, because if the email exists, we need to provide it. So before I show you the result object, I'm going to show you where you can find the following source code. Go to my GitHub profile, it's Ivo Kenov, hit repositories, write down TV here, and that's the repository in which I am uploading all the source code from my YouTube channel. It has quite a lot of code, all the lessons are linked here, so you may like something. I will be extremely thankful if you give the project a star. You may also watch it if you want to be notified for every new lesson, because every time I create a lesson I link it here. And you can play with this code, clone it, open a pull request if you like, whatever is suitable for you. I would like to use the moment to thank my diamond and gold sponsors. That's Endeavor, Tsuke, Softuni, Smart IT, Noble Hair, and 1-Bit Software. Thank you guys, you truly rock. Some words about my diamond sponsor Endeavor. Endeavor are a software development company which are constantly searching for passionate developers. So if you are looking for new opportunity, make sure you check their site out. My other sponsors are 2K, Softuni, Smart IT, Noble Hair, and 1-Bit Software. Thank you guys, you truly rock. Now let's continue and good. So let's fix the error messages. I'm going to add infrastructure services result class. Result class. Which will have first a bow succeeded. Is that the proper grammar of this word? Yep. It's the similar logic is used in the identity user manager. Check that out. If result.succeeded. That's the whole idea. So bow get private set. Then I'm going to say that I want public static implicit operator. That's the tricky part. I want to convert every boolean to result object. I'm going to say this result.succeeded equals should be like this. The whole idea is when I create an implicit operator, I'm allowing the compiler to cast automatically for me Boolean values to result objects. So look at that. If I go to the profile service and say I'm no longer returning a result, I'm no longer returning a Boolean, I'm going to return a result from now on. And if I update the result here to be also returned, see that the compiler is not complaining about returning false to unresult object. And if I build the solution, it shouldn't have any errors. Well, that's another error. That's a problem here, but we're now going to refactor that and say if a result did not succeed, the same logic we're using in our registration result.succeeded return. Okay, it's the opposite. So let's update that. If updated, return okay, otherwise return bad request. Like this. If deleted, actually I prefer to have the bad path to be in the if, like this. So let's update the other controller to make it like if result succeeded, return bad request, otherwise return okay, like this. So all the ifs essentially return error, like here, unauthorized, result succeeded, and so on. So let's see here, it should be the same. If it didn't update correctly, return bad request. If it was not deleted, return bad request. We can also start using the result object here too, but we are going to do that in a minute. The whole idea is that I can now return false . when there is an error and return true directly, even though I'm returning a result. If I go to the result object, I can also say public string error. I'm going to say get and private set. And I can again use the implicit operator, static, sorry, and say I want to cast every string to an error. New result. I'm going to say succeeded is false because if we have an error, there's a problem. And error equals the string error. This implicit operator allows me to write error messages in my services. So if the user is not found, instead of false, I can just return user does not exist. Here I can say the provided email is already taken. And here I can say the same thing. The provided username is already taken. Otherwise, I just return true. I don't want to return empty strings or no's or something like that, because no, if I return no's here, I'm going to have a bad time with no reference exceptions in the future. But with the result object, everything is good enough. So in the profile controller, if the result is not succeeded, I want to return the error, and done. So I'm just providing the error here, and the client will be able to get it. The same thing we can do in our delete and update cats methods. You can just say update to result and delete to result. And if we want, we can return error messages too. For example, this cat does not belong to you. So I can return and say you cannot, this user cannot edit this cat. And here we can also say this user cannot delete this cat. And this way it's more descriptive to the client and to the user what kind of error happened. And it's easily done by the result object because you can return true or false when you don't have errors and error messages, and you can return a string directly. It's better this way rather than return new result blah blah blah, because it's just easier to read and easier to specify different error messages and different results. Good. So the next thing we need to do here is just to validate whether the updating is working. Let's update that. If result succeeded, we can also add, to make it more explicit, we can go and say, okay, public bow failure, which essentially is the opposite of succeeded, nothing else. And we can use that to not have the exclamation mark. If result failure, return bad request. It reads better and it's more expressive. The code is more self-documented this way. Good. Let's go to the identity controller and see whether everything, there is no failure here, but this result object comes from the identity, so we won't be able to reuse it. But in profile controller we can say if result failure, return bad request, like this. Let's rebuild it. And before we test it, I would like to invite you to my mentorship program, which is available on Patreon. It's on Patreon/Ivailo. There's a link down below in the description, on which I am providing exclusive extra video lessons for advanced topics. Additionally, I am providing a group, private Facebook group, on which we can comment and you can ask me anything, absolutely anything related to software development, any kind of problem you may have. And I'm also creating live workshops, which are completely live. You can attend them and watch the workshop and ask me questions. I'm giving different kinds of voting systems on which you can vote for my next content, and so on and so on. For example, we have a live workshop poll here, community voted lessons for this month. Here is an exclusive video, step-by-step Azure DevOps continuous integration, a guidebook, 70 pages guidebook about domain-driven design and clean architecture, absolutely practical. You can start from scratch and create your domain-driven design app. Some of the voted lessons, model binding workshop, C# to C# communication with RabbitMQ, SignalR, gRPC, and many others extra video lessons I'm creating. So if you find these posts attractive and this content attractive, consider subscribing to my Patreon, because I'm updating it every month. Now let's test the update of the profile update. Then we need to commit the changes and then republish the server. So we have put profiles from now on, and if we go, we may say that let's make it a little bit more flexible. Let's make the logic more flexible, like this. If user.profile.name is different from the provided name, update it. And the same thing for everything else. It's a little bit more code. We may use actions and functions to make that better, but it doesn't matter. This way, if the client sends only 3 properties for updating, we will update them. It's more flexible this way for the client. The gender will be provided as string too. It's a bit long method, so I would like to refactor it a bit. I'm going to say private bool, private task from bool. It's getting very long, so Let's extract this one to change profile email like this. So we need to provide a user object and an email object like this. This needs to be an async method, and this needs to return a result object. We also need the user ID. Await this change profile user ID email like this. If result dot failure, return result. We're going to do the same thing with this one. Change profile async task from result. Change user name. And we need the same thing, but instead of email, we just need username like this. And we need to return true if everything is fine. Good. Let's extract these two. Private sync task change profile. Like this. This way, the update method is a little bit shorter, and we extracted different kinds of logics in different methods. That's following the solid principles and high quality code, clean code, you name it. That's the whole idea here. Good. So I believe everything should be ready. Let me check the service here. Get equals no. This blank space was not needed. Here too. I'm going to leave that one because this method is on multiple lines. That's a style cop rule, so I'm going to follow it. In some of the future videos, we are going to add different static analysis to this project so that we will have automatic high quality code in terms of code styling, which is quite nice. Okay, so the profile service should be ready now. Let's rebuild it. I believe this project is having a very solid high standard for code styling, but there may be a few mistakes here and there, but overall I'm trying to write it as clean as possible. So okay, let's go and try to make a put request to Swash profiles, and I'm going to just change the name and, for example, the biography. New name or my name, doesn't matter, and my cool bio. Send that and see what's happening. An exception. User profile is no. User profile is no. Let me check that. Anti-framework core owned type no. Okay, owns one, good. On type no, include. Maybe we need to use include. Maybe I need to add with owner. Let me check that. Owns one with owner. It still doesn't fetch it. Framework core include owned types. So it's strange, maybe the find doesn't fetch the data. Maybe that's the default behavior, I'm not sure currently. So what I'm going to say, let's leave the with owner since the documentation was like that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, include user.profile where user.id equals user ID and fetch the first or default async. Like this. Let's try that. This should work. I have some cloudy memory that the profile object should be fetched. But for some reason property the profile is no. Let me search for that for a minute. So guys, I couldn't find a solution for this problem. For some reason it just doesn't work. Maybe because they changed something in Entity Framework Core 5, or maybe it's something else, but I've used previously on types and it didn't have any problem. So it's a little bit strange, but okay, we're going to use another solution. We're not going to use owned types here. I'm just going to remove the latest migration. And I'm just going to use one-to-one relationship. The other solution would be to copy all the profile properties here, but I don't want to do that. So let's change that. Let's add a profile to be instantiated every time we need it. Let's create another relationship. I'm going to say that the user has a profile and the profile has a user ID, public string user ID, get set, public user, user get set. This part of the relationship is not required actually, but let's leave just the user ID in the profile, and in the user we're going to have a profile like this. Then in the Catstagram DB context I'm going to say that the user has one profile, which also the profile has one user, so we're creating a one-to-one relationship. And then I'm going to say foreign key, and I'm going to say that the foreign key is in the profile and it's called user ID, like this. And then I'm going to add a new migration, and it should build. It's really strange. Maybe it's a bug in Entity Framework Core Preview because we're using a preview version, or maybe they changed something with the owned types. I'm not quite sure. Because in 3.1 I've used owned types and I haven't any problems, but strange really. Okay, user profiles. We're just going to use another approach. Ooh. The entity requires a primary key. Yeah, that's correct. So let's add public int ID here. And let's add a DB set of profiles. Let's try again. Let's see what was created. A new table profiles with everything else. It shouldn't be knowable. A profile without a user is not valid. So let's remove the latest migration and fix that. I'm going to specify that the profile has required user ID. So user ID is not knowable, name, profile, gender is private, okay, and there's a foreign key which maps the user ID to ASP.NET users. What I would like to also have is cascade deletion. So let's remove the latest migration and let's add on delete behavior, restrict. Good. I'm going to update the database and I'm going to change the logic. In my service layer. So profile service. I'm going to say that I want to find we will have a small bug with the old data, so we need to delete everything from our database and recreate it again. So or just use the users. Let's make it like this. If we don't have old data, like the current situation, where we have users without profiles, we can just fetch the profiles. But since we have users with old data, I'm going to say find user, which user dot id equals user id. Then I'm going to say select the user profile, and I'm going to say first or default async, which again won't work. Okay, let's do it like that. It's a bit tricky here. So get the users, include in the user the profile too, and find the user with the ID like this. So get me the user with its profile with first or default. I'm not sure whether we should leave this new profile here because it may recreate the profile. Let's do it without it, and then I'm going to say in the profile service, fetch the user with its profile, find the user with the user ID, and if the user is no, okay, then if the user dot profile is no, create a new one. This way all the this way the old data will be updated with profiles and the new data will have profile created. So let's just change that to profile, and let's replace that with that. I did that with Control plus H, which allowed me to replace something in the current selection. Okay, let's see what's the database. Currently, it should have some users without the extra tables, and it should have profiles. So every time somebody tries to update the profile, it should return the data. Also, when we try to fetch in the profiles controller, when we try to get, we're going to have no's here, so that should be also okay. Let's try it. So first I'm going to try to get the current profile to see what's going on. It returns no's, okay. Then I'm trying to update the name and the biography. I'm going to say hit send. I return 200, okay. And in the profiles there should be a new name and biography, which is kind of okay. We can also specify that the user ID to be the primary key, but let's leave it like that. It's fine the way it is, and if I get the current profile, it should have the current name and the biography. So it's working now. It's working with the one-to-one relationship. Not sure why it didn't work with owned types. It should work. It should work. But nevertheless, this was also a nice solution. It's clean enough, so we're going to take it. Now we have updating of the data. If the profile is not existing, we're creating a new one. So every old user will receive a new profile when we try to change it. The only thing we can do here is we can go to the data, to the model, and specify that the user ID to be key. Let's try it by saying that there's a key here. But that will need us to generate GUIDs. I'm not sure whether it's a good solution. Let's try it. I'm not sure what is going to happen. Let's try it live on the video so that you will be able to learn something new. Me too. I haven't done that. So we have profile, which has primary key user ID and foreign key again user ID. Okay, and we have noble false. This way it will be cleaner because we won't have to create an extra primary key. But let's see whether it will work when we try to fetch first the data. It should return nose, okay, and then if we try to put and update something, it returns okay, and then if we get it, it should be updated. So we improved our code by removing the extra primary key because we can now reuse the user ID as a primary key. The whole idea is that each user should have only one profile. So every profile should have a unique user ID, and this is how we're going to use it as a key. Okay, that's more than enough. For this video, I'm going to commit all the changes. Added, updating, added profile update functionality. So let's push everything. What we need to do is to deploy the changes for the client, but I'm going to create more videos for the server, so I'm going to deploy them later in one of my next videos. Before we finish, I would like to show you my testing tools. They are in my GitHub and they are called mytestedasp.net. So if you're developing ASP.NET Core projects and want to unit or integration test them, you can use my tools because they provide you very fast and clean way to write tests and assert controllers, services, models, you name it. So make sure you check it out. Okay guys, so this was it. I'm going to see you in my next video.